The air inside the grand ballroom was heavy with perfume and polished brass, with crystal chandeliers scattering light across a sea of silk gowns and black tuxedos. Nora Sinclair had told herself all week that this was only a wedding, nothing more. She would attend as a polite guest, smile when required, and leave quietly with her 8-year-old son before midnight. That was the plan. But plans were fragile things. They shattered at the first touch of fate. Kieran tugged at the sleeve of her dress, his small hand warm, his curious eyes, those unmistakable grey eyes, searching the far end of the room. "Mummy," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement rather than fear. "That man is staring at us." Nora followed his gaze, and the ground beneath her seemed to tilt. The crowd melted away, the chatter dimmed, and for a heartbeat the past 9 years dissolved into smoke. He was there. Thaddeus Lockhart. Taller than memory, sharper at the edges, devastating in a midnight tuxedo that seemed cut not from fabric but from shadow itself. His hair, once ink-black, now carried a dignified streak of silver at the temples, but his eyes, those piercing storm-grey eyes, had not changed. They widened now, shock ripping through their composure. Her lungs forgot how to work. The glass of champagne in her hand trembled, catching candlelight like a warning flare. He looked at her as though the years had been seconds, as though the college apartment with its peeling wallpaper and shared dreams had not long ago turned to dust. "Nora?" His voice carried across the marble hall, low but unmistakable. Heads turned, whispers swirled like leaves in wind. The sound of her name on his lips cracked open something inside her she had fought to bury. She pulled Kieran close, her fingers tightening protectively on his shoulders. "We need to leave," she murmured. But her son, innocent, unknowing, only blinked at her confusion. "Why, Mom? Did I do something wrong?" No answer came. How could she explain that the man standing at the altar rehearsing vows for another woman was not only her past lover, but her son's father? That every secret she had guarded, every sleepless night, wondering if she had been right to keep silent, had just come crashing down in the most public, merciless way possible. A ripple passed through the guests as a radiant figure approached Thaddeus, threading her arm through his. Imogen Frost, Nora's college roommate. Once they had shared late-night noodles and wild, impossible dreams. Now she was glowing, draped in ivory silk, a bride-to-be on the brink of forever. And at her side, her fiancé, was the man Nora had once thought she would grow old with. "Nora," Imogen said, her voice bright with champagne and destiny, "I see you've met my fiancé." The words landed like stones. Nora's world tilted, her breath catching. She forced her lips into something resembling a smile, while inside everything screamed. She had rehearsed many scenarios for this weekend. Polite reunions, awkward laughter, the bittersweet taste of nostalgia, but not this. Never this. Her son pressed against her hip, gazing up at the towering man with curiosity. "Mom," he asked softly, "who is he?" Nora's lips parted, but no sound came. How to answer? A stranger? A ghost? The love she lost? The father he had never known? Every possible truth threatened to spill into the room, to detonate and shatter lives like glass beneath a hammer. Thaddeus had not looked away. He was staring at Kieran now, at the copper hair and freckles, at the sharp jawline softened by youth, but most of all at the eyes, the exact shade of storm he saw in the mirror every morning. Recognition flashed across his face, raw and undeniable. Nora's heartbeat thundered. The chandelier light was too bright, the music too soft, the distance between them too small. She swallowed, fighting to control her expression, but her fingers still trembled as she guided Kieran away, whispering excuses to the crowd as though they were smoke screens. Behind her, she felt Thaddeus's gaze follow, burning, unyielding, and filled with the questions she had prayed she would never have to answer. The night air outside the ballroom was thinner, colder, bracing as lake wind skimmed over the water and climbed the stone steps to the terrace. Nora leaned against the iron railing, the metal cool through her palm, and tried to steady the riot in her chest. The glittering pavilion behind her breathed like a living thing. Laughter, a cello's low hum, ice chiming against glass. But out here, the world had narrowed to the crescent of the moon and the hush of waves tapping the dock. Kieran had followed the lantern-lit path toward the supervised children's corner just off the terrace. Paper lanterns, a telescope on a tripod, a patient young counselor explaining constellations. He glanced back twice to make sure she was watching. She smiled and nodded each time, the small ritual of reassurance they had perfected over years of being two against the world. A footfall, one, then another. She didn't turn. She knew the cadence of that stride the way a body remembers a song it hasn't heard in a decade. "Nora," he said softly, as if the name might shatter if he struck it too hard. Her hand tightened on the rail. "Congratulations," she managed. The word was crisp enough to cut. "Lake Tahoe suits you." He came to stand beside her, not close enough to touch, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him like a heat source in winter. He didn't answer at once. Perhaps there were no ordinary words for this meeting. Perhaps ordinary words had been left behind with shared rent and broken mugs, and a city that had made them and unmade them both. "Is he—" The question throbbed between them, unfinished. Not because he didn't know the answer, she heard certainty edging the syllables, but because saying it aloud would rearrange the architecture of all their lives. She kept her eyes on the lake. "He's 8, she said, and the wind took the rest of the sentence. She found it again, steadier. "He loves space. He can name the moons of Jupiter in order if you ask him." "I don't have to ask," Thaddeus said, and his voice had roughened. "I know what his eyes mean." Silence swept in, dense and luminous. Beneath it, the old language of their bodies sparked. Recognition in the angle of a shoulder, a memory in the slope of a jaw, the painful, exquisite knowledge of how close they had once lived inside each other's days. Her chest burned. She focused on the moon's reflection, broken to silver fragments across the water. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, not accusing, just stunned, as if he were speaking while the ground still shifted under his feet. "I tried." The two words were so small she almost swallowed them. Then they came again, fuller. "I tried, Thad." He turned then. She felt the weight of his gaze and forced herself to meet it. The years had given him gravity, the kind that draws and anchors. It was infuriating how beautiful he still was, how the scar along his eyebrow had softened rather than hardened his expression, how the silver at his temples made his eyes brighter. "When?" he said. "After you flew west. After the call when you said you had to stay longer. I sent emails." She swallowed. The memory was a knife with an old handle. "I wrote 3. The first was clumsy. The second I deleted twice and rewrote. The third. Her mouth wavered. The third said I wouldn't ask anything of you, but you deserved to know. His jaw clenched. I never saw them. There are 1,000 ways for messages to fall between cracks we didn't even know existed. She tried to smile, failed. I learned to stop peering into those cracks. He looked out over the water, voice low. I thought you were gone by choice. And I thought you stayed gone by choice. She let the words land. Where to put the grief of a misdelivered life? Perhaps here, beneath the talc-silver moon, between water and wind. A brittle laugh bobbed up in her throat and broke. This is a terrible place for this conversation. It is, he agreed. And it's somehow the only place. Tonight. She pressed her lips together, composing herself. In the children's corner, Kieran lifted his face to the sky while the counselor pointed with a small red flashlight, carving temporary stars across a map. The sight steadied her. He's kind, she said, and it felt like offering him something that mattered. He pretends to hate green vegetables, but he'll negotiate for 3 bites if I explain what magnesium does. Thaddeus's hand found the railing. His knuckles whitened, then eased. Does he know my name? Yes. She heard the fierce protection in her own voice and didn't apologize for it. He knows more than I meant for him to know. He asks good questions. He would, Thaddeus murmured. A small, sorrowful amusement passed over his mouth. It's all there, the furrow between his brows when he concentrates. You noticed. The confession slipped out, tender and cautious. I noticed everything. He inhaled, a measured breath like a diver choosing the moment to go under. May I see him closer? Not tonight, not to speak. Just to look without stealing from him. She hesitated. The instinct to shield, honed by 1,000 days and nights, rose up. Then she looked at Kieran again, at the earnest tilt of his face toward the sky, and felt something in herself unclench. You may, she said softly, for a moment. They moved together along the terrace, an invisible magnet drawing and repelling in the same breath. Nora lifted her hand to the edge of the children's area, and the counselor glanced over. Nora's look said, It's all right. The counselor smiled and turned back to her sky. Kieran didn't notice them at first. He was telling a story about Europa, about oceans beneath ice, and the possibility that life could glow there like bowl jellyfish. His hands made circles in the air, small planets orbiting certainty. The lamplight caught in his hair. When he finally glanced beyond the telescope and saw them, his face opened, because she was there, because her presence meant safety. He waved. Nora's heart tilted with love. Thaddeus lifted a hand in return, just a small motion at his side, as if too much movement might disturb the fragile membrane of the moment. He didn't say the word aloud, but she heard it anyway. Son. He'll ask you everything, she said under her breath, eyes on Kieran's eager mouth forming the word cryovolcanism like a charm. If we tell him. When we tell him, Thaddeus corrected, and there was a steadiness in it that pressed hot against her sternum. Together, if you'll let me. She exhaled, an unsteady thread of air. Tomorrow morning. Not at a party. Not under chandeliers. He nodded, acceptance without argument. For a moment they just stood there, watching the boy they had made, as if they were standing at the lip of an eclipse, and the light was about to return. Nora? The new voice was warm, glittering, familiar. Imogen's. The syllables lifted from behind them like a glass raised to toast. There you are. Oh, and Thad, the committee is looking for you. They want to time the rehearsal for the boat exit. A laugh, airy. Apparently there is a choreography to not falling into the lake in couture. Nora turned. Imogen was incandescent, the kind of beautiful that comes from certainty. Certainty of flowers arriving on time, of perfect lighting, of a name printed on napkins in gold. For a beat, the three of them stood within the triangulated geometry of old secrets and new vows. "I'll be right there," Thaddeus said, without looking away from Kieran. Then he straightened, his public shape settling over him like a tailored coat. He faced Imogen, and tenderness softened his expression. It was real, Nora saw. Affection, respect, a careful love. Her throat ached. Imogen's gaze slid to Nora. Something flickered there. Curiosity, perhaps, or the prickle of intuition that arrives before a storm. But her smile stayed bright. "Nora, darling, they've put you in cabin 11. You must let them bring you extra blankets. The nights are colder here than they look." Her fingers brushed Nora's forearm with genuine warmth. "And your young man, Kieran, yes? He's already charmed half the staff." "He tends to do that," Nora managed. Imogen followed their line of sight to the telescope nook, where Kieran was now explaining to the counsellor why the word moon was too simple for such different bodies. "He's darling," she said. "I'm stealing him to throw rose petals tomorrow." Nora smiled, but she felt the hinge of the night groan, the small shift when fate tests the door. She loved Imogen once like a sister. She might love this version of her still, the one whose laughter sounded like a string of pearls loosening from a clasp. "Come," Imogen said, looping her arm lightly through Thaddeus's, as if the gesture had always belonged to her. "There's a dreadful conversation happening about whether we should change the waltz to something less waltzy. I need your gravitas." "I'll be there in a minute," he told her, and his eyes flicked to Nora in a question. Not permission, he had learned that much in the years apart, but a promise to return. Nora gave the smallest of nods. "Go. Survive this moment. We are all learning how to breathe again." Imogen's gaze darted once more between them. She felt it. Nora saw it land. The subtle recognition that some rooms hold older stories than their decor. But if the knowledge touched her, she turned from it with grace. "The band is starting again," she said brightly. "At least dance once, Nora, if only to keep the ghosts happy." She glided away, taking with her the scent of white peonies and new beginnings. Thaddeus hesitated a heartbeat longer, then followed, his shoulders squaring as he stepped back into the light. Nora watched him go. A strange ache and relief braided together, each thread drawing different blood. Kieran ran toward her then, the telescope momentarily abandoned. "Mom!" He skidded to a stop, breathless. "The counsellor says if we stay late enough we might see the Milky Way as a band, not the candy bar, the real one." "We'll stay," she said, smoothing the hair off his forehead. She kept her voice light, but she felt transparent, as if the wind had thinned her to something that could float away. "Give me 5 minutes." He nodded, solemn with the importance of stars. 5. I'll count in my head." She watched him sprint back. 1, 2, 3. Then let herself fold into a chair at the terrace's edge. The music inside swelled, and couples spilled onto the dance floor under a canopy of lights that made the pavilion look like a galaxy found a way to come down to earth. She sensed him before she saw him. When Thaddeus returned, he held 2 glasses, sparkling water for her, knowing without asking, and champagne for himself. He set them on the low stone wall between them, an offering placed on neutral ground. "They want to rehearse the father-daughter entrance," he said wryly, as if the joke could save them from drowning. "Apparently there is a wrong way to walk on a dock. Is there a right way to say any of this?" The sentence slipped out, unsummoned and too true. "No," he said. The candour of it was a kindness. "But we'll try to say it well." Music lilted outward, a slow number, close and forgiving, the kind that made you remember the terrain of a body you had once called home. Thaddeus looked toward the light, then back at her. "Dance with me," he said. The words were a door. Not to the past, she had no interest in stepping backward, but to the thing that had always been theirs, the way their bodies spoke, honest when their mouths could not be. She should have said no, sensible, crisp, final. Instead, she listened to the low voice in her ribs, the one that had learned to hum over the sound of closing doors. "All right," she said. He didn't touch her at first. They stepped onto the threshold where shadow met glow, where the lake threw coins of light up the beams, and the band's rhythm stitched the air. He held out a hand. She placed hers in it. He drew her in with exquisite care, the way you lift a book you loved as a child, the way you cradle a question you're not sure you deserve to ask. One palm found the small of her back. The other threaded her fingers. The old fit was still there, outrageously, heartbreakingly exact. "I used to count," she said, because the silence had turned cathedral and she needed a pillar to lean on. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, to keep from stepping on your feet. You never stepped on my feet. I was very good at pretending not to." He laughed, barely. The warmth of it moved through her like a remembered summer. "You were very good at making me believe I was steadier than I was." They turned. The pavilion blurred, silk, flash, smile, while the music drew them into an orbit with its own gravity. Her cheek hovered a breath from his shoulder. She didn't rest it there. She could have. She didn't. "What happens to a story?" he asked quietly. "When the middle is torn out and the ending arrives without a map?" "You relearn the beginning," she answered, "and you stop pretending the middle didn't matter." He exhaled. "I'm terrible with endings." "You built a life out of not accepting them." It wasn't accusation. It was observation. "You always did like to force a door where there wasn't one." "Except where it mattered most," he said, and she felt him choose not to dress the regret. "Nora, if I had known—" "I know." The words were simple and begged no further apology. She felt them settle in her bones with a softness that surprised her. "I know." They passed near a table of guests who were laughing too loudly at something someone said about venture capital and moonshots, and the familiar scent of ambition and networking made her mouth taste of nickel. They moved away, back toward the terrace's edge, and the night breathed easier. "He didn't say I missed you. He didn't say I dreamed your name when the market opened and closed. He didn't say I kept a mug I never liked, because your lip had once touched its rim." She heard those things anyway, in the careful way he didn't grip her too tightly, in the way his thumb hovered above the tendons of her right hand, and then chose stillness. When the song ended, he let her go first. He stepped back, not into distance, but into space, the respectful kind, the kind that knows longing and refuses hunger's grasp. She was grateful for that. All these years later, he still remembered how to be gentle with her edges. Nora glanced toward the child's corner. Kieran had tipped his head far back, the better to drink the dark. The counsellor knelt to adjust the eyepiece, patient, reverent. The sight put steel in Nora's spine. Love, in its fiercest form, has a way of curing dizziness. "We'll need to talk to her," she said. No pronouns necessary. The name hung like a crystal drop at the end of a thread. Imogen. Yes. His answer held no hesitation. Tonight. Her heart startled like a bird. Tonight. I won't begin a life tomorrow with a lie inside it, he said, quiet and even, whatever that costs me. She searched his face. The man before her had once been a boy with a fury to build something no one else could see. The fury was still there, but it had calmed into purpose. Then go, she said, while the lake is honest and the music is loud enough to swallow broken sounds. He nodded. For a moment they simply existed together, human and fallible and trying. He lifted her hand and, with a courtesy that had somehow survived the years, the money, the headlines, he bent and touched his lips to the ridge where vein met bone. Her skin remembered him, so did the place beneath it that held difficult truths and forgiving light. She steadied herself against the call to fall. When he left, she didn't watch him cross the room. She crossed herself, one palm to shoulder, one to cheek, and went back to her son, whose face lit when she approached as if she were the only star worth charting. "Mom," he said, squinting into the eyepiece, "I think I can see the band of the galaxy, like milk spilled but neat." She knelt beside him, the tulle of her dress sighing against flagstone, and let the sky teach her again about distances and their illusions. "Tell me everything," she whispered, and he did, about light years and dust lanes, about how you can be looking at something as it was 1,000,000 years ago and still feel it now on your skin. Later, after she tucked him into the space-themed sheets of the cabin bed, the ones with tiny embroidered comets skimming the edges, and after she stood for too long in the small kitchen, thinking nothing, she heard the knock she knew would come. It was soft, and yet it filled the room. She opened the door. Thaddeus stood on the threshold, the tuxedo gone, an open-collared shirt, making him look disarmingly like the man who had once carried a futon up 6 flights of stairs without setting it down. His eyes were raw, but not wrecked. A man can break without shattering. "I told her," he said, 4 simple words, the kind that are never simple. Nora stepped back. He came in, not further than the living room, where the sofa waited like a neutral witness. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and the detergent used for sheets. Outside, the lake murmured its old story about patience and rock. "How did she—" Nora began. "With more grace than I deserve," he said, and a tired, wry tenderness crossed his mouth. "And more truth than I expected. She asked me if I would marry her tomorrow, knowing what I know now. I said that if I did, I would be making a promise with a fracture through it. And she said she wouldn't ask me to carry that weight." Nora's fingers curled around the back of a chair. Grief moved through her, not for herself, or not only, but for the girl with champagne eyes who laughed like pearls. "She loved you," she said. "She did." He didn't pretend otherwise. "I loved her. I won't small'n that to make this easier." "What now?" Nora asked. It wasn't the old "now what?" of stubble-bright mornings and rent due. It was the clean, terrifying kind, heavy with lives and consequences. "Now," he said. I ask you if I can sit with you and talk about a boy who loves moons. And tomorrow, if you agree, we tell him the truth, and then we make a map no one has made for us." She looked toward the closed door down the small hall where Kieran slept, one arm flung over a book about stars, glasses folded on the bedside table he called a night command center. She felt the shape of the map grow faint and real at the same time. Mountains, a river, a compass trembling between norths. "Yes," she said. And here was the smallest opening of all, the kind that changes a life without noise. "Sit." They talked until the moon had crossed half the sky, until the fire in the small stone hearth had settled to a soft red hush. They did not solve the mathematics of forgiveness, or chart the exact route from then to now, but they laid markers. Who picks up from school on Tuesdays? How to handle the word dad when it arises on small, ordinary mornings? Whether Kieran should keep the nightlight shaped like Saturn. "Of course he should," Thaddeus said, half smiling, as if the question bordered on blasphemy. At some hour, when clocks lost their meaning, Nora rose and brought out a shoebox from the back of a closet. It held the archaeology of a life done with care. The card from Kieran's birth, the hospital bracelet, the first drawing that looked vaguely like a rocket ship, but was in fact a dragon with dreams. She set the box between them and took off the lid. They leaned over it like conspirators, reverent, almost afraid to touch. He picked up a photograph. Kieran, age 3, snowsuit creased like an accordion, eyes already that storm-grey flame. "You lifted him into this world," he said, the sentence wonder and apology and vow in one. "You did the nights, the thermometers, the stubborn zippers. And the field trips, and the science fair glue," she added, "because humour can be grace when neither sermon nor song fits." He looked at her then, straight and unguarded. "Thank you for not making me the villain in his story." "You were never the villain," she said. "Just absent. There's a difference. One we can start to fix." He nodded, and a quiet relief loosened something along his spine. Outside, the lake turned the grey of a pocketed coin. The cabin settled, wood remembering its trees. When he left before dawn, he stopped at the door as if the threshold held a lesson. "I'll come back at 9, he said. "We'll do this together." He hesitated, less than a heartbeat, more than a breath. "Nora, don't," she said gently, not unkind. "Let's not spend tonight naming ghosts." He understood. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," she echoed. She stood at the window after he was gone and watched the first hint of pink thread the mountains. It occurred to her that the sky makes a ritual out of beginnings on purpose, so that when we are brave enough to try again, the world agrees to try with us. Behind her in the bedroom, Kieran turned once in sleep, murmured something about ice oceans and light, and settled. Nora rested her forehead against the cool glass and let her breath fog the pain, then clear it, fog it, clear it, a small human tide against the vast and patient morning. And the morning uncurled slowly, wrapped in the scent of pine and the pale gold of dawn spilling through the cabin's curtains. Nora had barely slept. Her body had lain still, but her mind had run the length of the night, circling questions with no answers, pressing against memories that had sharpened instead of dulled. When she rose at last, the floorboards cool beneath her bare feet, she felt as though she was stepping into a day that would decide everything, though she could not yet name how. In the small bedroom, Kieran was awake already, sitting cross-legged on the bed with his space encyclopedia open like a shield in his lap. He looked up when she entered, his glasses slipping down his nose, and gave her the small, solemn smile that was so much his father's. "Morning, Mum. I made coffee. It's strong. You always like it strong when you have that face." "What face?" she asked, leaning to kiss the crown of his hair. He smelled faintly of soap and the lake breeze that clung to fabric. "The face like you're solving an impossible riddle," he said matter-of-factly. He turned a page, the rustle loud in the hush of morning. "Is it about the man from last night?" The air caught in her lungs. She perched on the edge of the bed. "You noticed?" "I notice everything," he said with a faint shrug. He looked at me like he knew me, like family looks at family. "Is he my dad?" Her heart thudded. The question, spoken so cleanly, so directly, stripped her of every practiced deflection she had used for years. She reached for his hand, small and warm in hers. "Yes," she said. Her voice trembled, but the truth steadied it. "His name is Thaddeus Lockhart. He's your father." Kieran blinked, absorbing this, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then he whispered the name as if testing its weight. "Thaddeus Lockhart. That sounds like a character in one of my books, a hero. Or a villain." He closed the encyclopedia. "Why didn't he come before?" Nora's throat tightened. "Because he didn't know about you. I thought I had told him, but the messages never reached him. He found out only last night, when he saw you." She brushed a curl back from his forehead. "If he had known, I believe he would have been here from the beginning." Kieran was quiet, studying the blanket's pattern with careful intensity. So now he knows. What happens next? Before she could answer, a knock sounded at the door, soft but steady. Her heart stuttered. She knew that rhythm. She rose, smoothed her hair with a nervous hand, and opened the door. Thaddeus stood there, casual in jeans and a grey sweater that matched the storm in his eyes. He looked as though he had been awake as long as she had, shadows beneath his gaze, but there was a steadiness in his posture that spoke of decisions made. He carried nothing in his hands except a cautious hope. "Good morning," he said quietly. His eyes moved past her to the boy sitting on the bed, and everything else seemed to fall away. "Kieran." For the first time their son heard his name spoken by the father who had given it but never known it. Something electric moved through the room. Kieran slid off the bed, bare feet silent on the wood, and came to stand a cautious few steps away. He tilted his chin, studying the man before him with an intensity that made Nora's throat ache. "You're my dad," he said finally. Not a question, a declaration. "Yes," Thaddeus answered. His voice was rough, but certain. "I am." The boy's eyes searched his face as though looking for proof written in bone and skin. Then, with the blunt honesty of children, he asked, "Do you want me?" The question nearly broke them both. Nora's breath caught. Thaddeus went still, his hand flexing as if he longed to reach out, but feared too much weight on such fragile ground. He knelt, so his eyes met his son's. "Are more than anything in this world," he said, and his voice carried no hesitation. "If I had known about you, I would never have missed a single day. I want you now, tomorrow, always, if you'll let me." Kieran's lower lip wobbled, but he pressed it firm. He nodded once, brisk, and then softer. "Okay, but you have to help me with my science project. Mum always gets the order of the planets wrong." A laugh broke from Thaddeus, startled and choked with emotion. He glanced up at Nora, and for a heartbeat their eyes locked. Two people watching the miracle of their child accept a truth too big for any mourning. She pressed her lips together, swallowing tears. He looked back to Kieran. "I'd like that," he said. "More than you know." The moment swelled, fragile and beautiful, and then the spell was broken by the sharp vibration of Nora's phone on the kitchen counter. She crossed quickly to silence it, but the name on the screen made her pause. Imogen. The message was short. "Come to my suite at 11. Bring him." Nora's stomach twisted. She looked back at Thaddeus, who had risen to his feet but stayed close to their son, as though unwilling to put distance between them now that the truth was spoken. She handed him the phone. He read the message, his jaw tightening. "She knows," Nora whispered. "She wants to see us." Thaddeus nodded slowly. "Then we'll go. Together." Nora looked at Kieran, who was watching them both with sharp curiosity. She crossed to him, cupping his cheek. "Sweetheart, Miss Frost wants to talk with us this morning. It may not be easy, but we'll face it together. All right?" Kieran adjusted his glasses, solemn beyond his years. "Okay, but afterward, can we still look at the stars tonight?" "Yes," Thaddeus said before Nora could answer. His voice was firm, a vow. "No matter what else happens, we'll look at the stars." The suite smelled of lilies, and the faint trace of last night's champagne dulled now to something almost sour. Morning light poured in from the tall windows, gilding the furniture in soft gold. But the woman standing in the center of the room seemed carved from something sharper. Imogen Frost still wore elegance like armor, cream silk blouse tucked into slate trousers, hair drawn back with perfect precision. But her eyes gave her away. They were raw, rimmed with the sleepless blue of a long night. Nora stepped inside with Kieran close at her side, Thaddeus just behind. For a moment, none of them spoke. The silence was thick, alive with everything that had been left unsaid for years, and everything that had spilled loose in a single night. Imogen's gaze went first to the boy. She studied him with an intensity that made Nora want to step forward and shield him, but Kieran stood still, brave in the way children can be when they don't yet know the weight of grown-up wars. He met her look, wide-eyed but unflinching, as though sensing that this was a moment he had to weather. "So," Imogen said at last, her voice clipped, brittle, "this is him." "Yes," Thaddeus answered. The single word carried centuries. Imogen's laugh was sharp, a blade striking stone. "And here I was, rehearsing vows last night, promising to stand beside you in all things, never knowing you already had a family waiting in the shadows." Her gaze flicked to Nora, cold and cutting. "Did you enjoy keeping this secret? Was it revenge? Some twisted game?" Nora's breath caught. "It wasn't a game. I tried to tell him. The words never reached." "Convenient," Imogen bit out. "And now you appear with the perfect weapon," she gestured toward Kieran, "on the eve of my wedding." Kieran shifted, his small hand tightening in Nora's. She bent, whispering against his ear. "It's all right, love." Then she straightened, her eyes finding Imogen's. "I never wanted to hurt you. Not then, not now. Life, twisted in ways I couldn't untangle." "Don't you dare dress this in poetry," Imogen snapped. "I lost count of the nights he sat in my kitchen, swearing you had vanished without a word, and I, like a fool, I believed him. I told myself I was the lucky one because I had him, because you didn't want him. But all along it was a lie. You wanted him enough to keep his child." Thaddeus stepped forward, his voice low, heavy. "Imogen, stop. She sent letters. I never saw them. That failure is mine." Imogen's eyes cut to him, furious. "And what of me, Thad? What of the woman who built a future with you while you carried her ghost in silence?" "Did you ever really see me?" The question landed like a storm. Nora looked away, heart pounding. Thaddeus's throat worked, but he did not flinch. "I did see you. I loved you. In my way. But what I had with Nora never left me. I buried it because I thought she chose to leave. Last night proved that everything I believed was built on absence, not truth." Imogen's face wavered, fury flickering into pain. "So what now? You cast me aside because she returned with your son? You erase me with a single sunrise?" "No," Thaddeus said. He raked a hand through his hair, raw honesty roughening his voice. "I don't erase you. You deserve more respect than that. But I cannot promise vows I cannot keep. You deserve a man whose heart is not divided." Silence fell again, thicker, crueler. Imogen's breath shook. Then she turned to Kieran, and to Nora's surprise, her expression softened, cracked open by something human. She crouched so her eyes were level with the boy's. "You're blameless," she said quietly. "None of this is your fault. Don't let anyone ever make you think it is." Kieran blinked, uncertain, but he nodded. His hand crept tighter into Nora's. Imogen rose, every line of her body trembling, though her voice when she spoke again was steady. "Go, all of you. Leave me what's left of my dignity." "Imogen," Thaddeus began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "Go!" There was nothing left to say. Nora guided Kieran toward the door, her chest heavy with grief for the girl she had once laughed with in college kitchens, the friend who had braided her hair before exams, who had whispered secrets under blankets. She paused at the threshold, turned back. "I never meant to steal him from you," she whispered. Imogen's eyes glistened, but her smile was sharp. "You didn't steal. He was never truly mine." The door closed softly behind them. In the corridor, the silence was different. Emptier, aching. Kieran looked up at them both, confusion clouding his face. "Is she okay?" he asked. Nora knelt to his level. "She's hurt. Sometimes grown-ups hurt in ways we don't know how to fix. But she'll be all right, in time." Thaddeus stood rigid, staring at the carpet, as though it were the only solid thing beneath him. "She deserved better," he murmured. Nora rose, laying a hand on his arm. "We all did." They walked together down the corridor, the boy between them, 3 shadows stretched long in the morning light. Later, by the lake, when Kieran skipped stones across the water, Nora stood with Thaddeus, the air between them heavy with both relief and sorrow. He turned to her, eyes dark and searching. "What happens now?" She swallowed. "We build something. Carefully. For him. For us. If we're brave enough." His hand found hers, tentative but steady. "Then let's be brave." The water caught the morning sun, scattering it in 1,000 directions, as though even the lake itself believed that from broken things new light could still be born. The day stretched long and golden, the lake shifting from morning silver to the deep sapphire of afternoon. Nora walked the winding path back from the dock, with Kieran bounding ahead, his pockets full of smooth stones he insisted would one day become part of his collection of important things. Thaddeus lingered beside her, his hand brushing near hers but never quite touching, as though he feared a single contact might shatter the fragile piece they had carved from chaos. At the cabin, Kieran sprawled on the rug with his stones, building tiny planets in imaginary orbits. Nora poured lemonade, the pitcher sweating in the warmth. She caught Thaddeus watching the boy, a look on his face she had never seen before, something between awe and mourning, threaded with determination. "He's extraordinary," he said softly. "He's ours," Nora replied. The words landed heavy and sweet. She had guarded them for years, whispered them into dark rooms where no one else could hear. Now, spoken aloud, they felt like a promise rather than a secret. They spent the afternoon together as if it had always been so. Thaddeus helped Kieran design a catapult out of spoons and elastic bands. Nora laughed until her cheeks hurt when the first trial launched a grape into the fireplace. Later, they took the trail through the trees, sunlight dripping through branches, the scent of pine rich in the air. Kieran narrated facts about galaxies and volcanoes with the gravity of a professor, while Thaddeus listened with rapt attention, nodding as though every word were revelation. At twilight, the boy finally slept, curled on the sofa with his book open like a shield across his chest. Nora pulled a blanket over him and then stepped out onto the porch where Thaddeus was waiting, leaning against the railing, the sky behind him streaked in violet and rose. "He trusts you already," she said quietly. Thaddeus turned. The fading light painted him in soft shadow, made him look younger, closer to the boy she had once known. "I don't deserve it," he admitted, "but I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can." Nora felt the ache in her chest swell. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to lean into the possibility of a life remade, though fear whispered of heartbreak's return. She stepped closer, her hand brushing the wood near his. "I used to think love was something we only get once," she confessed. "One wild, impossible chance. But maybe it can return, if we're strong enough to hold it." Thaddeus's eyes found hers. In them she saw the man who had carried her books through rainstorms, the man who had once written her name across the margins of his notes, the man who now stood willing to risk everything for the boy sleeping inside. Slowly, as if giving her time to turn away, he reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull back. Their fingers laced, fitting as though the years had been a pause rather than a severance. He drew in a breath that trembled, then leaned closer, his forehead brushing hers. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered. "Not for a single day." Her breath hitched. Tears blurred her sight, but she smiled through them. "Then don't stop now." Their lips met, not with the fever of youth, but with the deep, steady urgency of two souls finding home again after years lost in the dark. The kiss was tender, raw, threaded with apology and promise, heavy with all the words they had never said. When they pulled apart, the stars had begun to pierce the sky, soft and eternal. Nora rested her head against his shoulder. "Tomorrow will be hard," she murmured. "Yes," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "But tonight, we have this." They stood together under the new constellation of their future, the night wrapping around them like a vow written in starlight. Inside, their son dreamed beneath his blanket, safe at last between the two halves of his world. And as the lake carried the moon's reflection across its surface, Nora realized that broken stories could still find endings, and endings could become beginnings again. If this story touched you, if it made you feel the power of love, second chances, and family, I invite you to like this video, subscribe for more heartfelt stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. Tell me what love means to you.